Hi there. I am so happy you chose to worship God with us here at the Cloverdale Seventh-day Adventist Church. I invite you to allow the presence of God to fill you up. Also, if you are desiring to support the cause of Christ through your kind generosity, or maybe you have some questions, please feel free to visit our website at cloverdale.org.
It's great to be here with all of you this morning. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces, and also I'm grateful for those of you who are watching us online. If you don't mind, if you're watching us online, and if you can leave a comment either on Facebook or on YouTube where you're watching us from, I love to go back and look through the comments later on. So thank you in advance for that. You know, I love being a part of this church and seeing all the intentional involvement from people from different places, the support that our church gives to projects from senior students at our schools, to the children's story, to the wonderful music that we have so intentionally picked and put together, and the whole thing coming together. And of course, hearing you sing. I was sitting here in the front and I could hear the church sing, and what a beautiful sound that is. I'm getting emotional. What a beautiful sound it is to hear you sing on a Sabbath morning here as we worship God. Thank you for choosing to join us, to worship with us this morning here at the Cloverdale Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thank you to those of you who are joining us online. If you're watching it live or if you watch it later on, make sure to leave a comment. If something touched you, and especially if you received a special blessing, leave it in the comments. I love for us to have a sense of community where we're interacting with one another, whether you're here in person or if you're watching us online. You know, before I jump into the text, and by the way, we're going to be looking at Exodus. So if you want to turn there and just kind of wait in Exodus chapter 1, we're going to spend the bulk of our time in chapter 3. But before we get there, I just want to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I've heard people say, you know, when I study the Bible, I'm not biased. I come to it completely unbiased. And maybe the person who's saying that is really innocent and truly believes that. But I believe that we all have implicit biases. We can't erase it, but at least we can be upfront about it. So let me share with you where I'm coming from. My background is I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. I grew up believing that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. Not only that, I grew up in ministry. And by that, I mean my father is a pastor. He's pastoring near Boston right now. My grandfather retired, and he was a church pastor. He was a conference treasurer. He was conference president for a while. I have one uncle on each side of the family who are also pastors. One of them just retired. And by this, I mean I grew up involved in ministry. I would hear about it around the dinner table. I was involved in it throughout the week and on the weekends. And you know, my whole life, with my wife and I, we met at church, involved in ministry. So sort of my whole life has always been with this awareness that God is real and that God calls us to do something in service for Him and in service for others. So this has been a value, just part of my life growing up. Now also, because I've been in church for so long, I can't remember not being in church, I am also deeply aware that the church as an organization falls short. Turns out people are not perfect. And do you realize that when, I need to get back to this, but I used to have a gym membership, and I'd show up at the gym, and not everybody who was there was perfectly fit and in the best shape of their lives. Can you imagine that there were people at different stages? Some of them were like crazy, super fit, and some were just beginning. Can you believe that? Going to the gym. I know, blows your mind. And church is similar. There are some people that I've met in church that it's like any day now, they're just going to like go up to heaven because they're such incredibly wonderful people. And there's some people that you think, wow, they really need Jesus. This is exactly where they need to be because they need help. And it's like that in church. You know, so I've become there, you know, you go through stages in life, and I've gotten like disappointed with the church and this and the other, but you know what? I realize that I'm not perfect either. And you guys have to put up with me. And if you put up with me, the least that I can do is put up with you as well. And that way, we all, what I'm trying to say is, flawed as the church, as an organization is, I still see it doing so much good. That when I was in high school, I decided I wanted to go and study theology and, go into ministry as well. Because even though it's not perfect, I would love to be part of the solution, part of the good that exists in churches, in communities. Even though I make mistakes, I wanted to make mistakes at least heading in the right direction, at least trying to help. So this message, this whole series that we're doing here about a call to adventure, I'm inviting you to join me in this. This is how I try to live my life. This adventure has brought my family and myself here recently, and it's exciting to see what God is doing. And it's been exciting all along. And I just want you to join. And I know it's hard. It's not always clear or obvious. It's not perfect by any means. But I think it's worth it. And turns out, when I stop to think about it, I don't want my life to be easy and comfortable necessarily. I want my life to be worthwhile. I don't mind working hard if I can look back and see that it was worth it. It might take 20 years to finish a quilt, but if it comes out that beautiful and you see that God's working in this and you can see wow, God is using what I'm doing to bless others, then it's worth it. And by the way, that was a reference to the children's story. If you're watching online, you missed it, you can watch the video later and catch that part. And I think now we're ready to jump into the text. But before we do, I invite you to bow your heads with me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we came together this morning to worship you. And some of us, Lord, we're just excited because we see you working in our lives. And some of us, maybe it's our first time in this church, maybe our first time watching online. And we're not even sure why we're here, but you know why. And I just pray that as we spend these moments together, that you would speak to our hearts. Father, I pray that you would use me. I pray that you would speak to us through the text and the Bible and impress in our hearts what you would have us do. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Exodus. Easy to find in the Bible. It's the second book in the Bible. We begin with Genesis and the story of creation and everything. And the book of Genesis ends with the death of a man, a very special man. Does anybody know from the top of your head, where does the book of Genesis end? Who just died? Joseph. And if those of you who are familiar with your Old Testament stories, Joseph is the one who was sold as a slave to Egypt. He became very powerful, and God revealed to Pharaoh a dream. Joseph, who could interpret the dream, and they were able to make it through the famine that came upon the land and ended up with the whole family of Joseph living in Egypt. And they are literally the children of Israel, their father, whose name was Jacob. And God changed it to Israel. And by the way, quick aside, doesn't really tie into this story. I guess it does. The name Israel, it just means that someone who wrestles with God. And I like that because it's not someone who has it all together. It's not someone who has all the answers. Someone who's wrestling with God and with men. It's this idea of I'm in it and I'm in the struggle. I'm just not giving up. And if you're in the struggle, it's good. If you're in the struggle, it can be hard. You can have really tough days and feel like giving up. But as long as you're there in the struggle, that makes you, part of this family of God. So he ends there in Egypt and things are going really well. And then we come to Exodus chapter 1. And around verse 8, we see that there's a new Pharaoh. And this new Pharaoh didn't know Joseph and what Joseph did and how Egypt benefited from Joseph. He has no idea who Joseph was. All he sees is these Israelites, and turns out there's a lot of them. Actually, they're stronger and more numerous than the Egyptians. And they begin to get scared. They're afraid of all these immigrants coming into the country. What are they going to do? I know what we need to do. Let's make them slaves. That will keep their numbers down. Let's make their life difficult and hard. And when they do that, the Israelites get stronger. As the Israelites face oppression and challenges, they get stronger, and the Egyptians are thinking, this isn't working. And they have another idea. Let's call the what do you call it? The ladies that help them when they're giving birth? Midwives, thank you. They call the midwives together and they say, okay, look, when a boy is born, we don't want them to continue to live. But if it's a girl, you can let them live. The midwives heard that message, but they feared God. And they did not listen. And God bless them. And it's amazing because we don't have the name of the Pharaoh, but the Bible mentions the name of these two ladies. So it's really interesting that thousands of years later, we know their names, but we have no idea who the Pharaoh was. Interesting how things work. So they were faithful to God, and their names are mentioned here in Exodus chapter 1. And they were faithful. So what ends up happening is that the Pharaoh, verse 22, commanded all of his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, every daughter you shall let live. In this context, Moses is born. You know, these two Levites get together and they have a son, and she looks at her son, the mom, and she looks at him and she says, oh, he's so beautiful. Let's hide him. Let's disobey this law that's out there. Let's just hide him for as long as we can. Turns out she was able to hide him for 3 months. And then, it became difficult. A 3-month-old, he was getting kind of big. And she said, well, I guess it's time to take him to the river. But the law never says we couldn't build him a little ark. So she gets to working and she makes a basket and she uses pitch or asphalt to make it watertight, and she places her baby in the river by the reeds and leaves his older sister watching. Now there's this crazy coincidence. For those of you who don't believe in God, there's this crazy coincidence that takes place that just at that time, the daughter of Pharaoh comes in to bathe. And out of all the places in the Nile, she goes exactly to where the reeds and this basket is. She sees the basket, asks her servant to grab it for her. When she opens, there's a baby crying. And God touched her heart, and she was moved with compassion for that baby. And she was aware this was probably a Hebrew baby. But she had compassion on that baby. The sister comes running up and says, ma'am, would you mind if I found someone to nurse that baby for you? And then Moses' mom has the privilege of receiving money, of being paid to take care of her own children. What a beautiful idea of mothers being valued for doing the most important thing in the world, which is to raise a generation. And she was paid to take care of her son and instruct him in such a way that he would, for the rest of his life, love God. Once he was old enough, he was taken to live in the palace with the daughter of Pharaoh. And the Bible doesn't go into any details, but I imagine there he received the best education the ancient world had to offer. And he probably learned about geography, and he learned about war, and he learned about science, and he learned about travel, and he learned about all of these things so that he could be a successful person functioning in society. He knew the Egyptian culture, he knew the Egyptian religion, he knew the Hebrew culture and language, and so he was the perfect person to navigate the situation at the time. He knew the politics, he knew everything. And as a young man, he saw the problem with slavery. He noticed that it was not right. And he wondered, could everybody else be blind to clearly the wrong that's happening here with slavery and the oppression of my people? And he wanted to do something about it. It burned within him the desire to do something. And one day, as he was going out to check out his people and how they were doing, he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite. Now, Moses had not had the privilege, had not had the opportunity to read any superhero stories. He'd never heard about Batman or Zorro, and he didn't realize that he should wear a mask. He looked to one side and the other. Nobody was looking. And he went, and I guess he was trained in martial arts because he ended up killing the Egyptian. Lucky for him, apparently there's lots of sand in Egypt, and he buried the body in the sand, and he walked away hoping nobody would know. But somebody saw, and word got out. And Moses found out that people found out. And then the Pharaoh found out. And he wanted to kill Moses. But he had fled the country by that point. And this brings us to his wilderness experience. He's out there, according to Acts chapter 7, verse 31, he spent 40 years tending sheep. In this process, he found a wife, had a child, and he was there just living his life, taking care of his father-in-law's flocks, just being there in nature 40 years. You could say that he had the college education from the best universities of Egypt, the best universities probably of the ancient world, and now God took him in for his internship. He says, now the next thing I need you to learn, especially because you just killed somebody, is I need you to learn patience. And what better place than out in nature? So he had the political, the military, all the head knowledge. And now he went out there and he spent some time in nature with animals. And I think in that process gained some fresh insights into God and who God is. And some of the deeper truths about life that you cannot learn inside of a classroom. You learn it living out life, doing the work. And here is this man with the education that would allow him to be a world leader, taking care of sheep in the wilderness. Completely overqualified, yet learning in the process. It's interesting. There's this thing that happens in ministry. It probably happens in other industries as well, in other areas of work, in other careers. I'm just not familiar with all of them. But I know in ministry, because talking with friends, there's some that graduate and they're so excited and they're going to change the world, they're going to change the church, and they're going to do great things, and then they get hired and they're stuck in a country church out in the boonies, and they're there for about a year and they walk away from ministry because they're not being used to their potential according to their own thinking. Oh, God's not using me, the conference doesn't recognize what I have to offer, I'm stuck out in the boonies, and this is not for me, and they walk away. But let me tell you, working in the countryside with churches of different sizes, there's so much to be learned. Wherever God has you right now, if there's some of you who are in here or watching online and maybe you're just doing your internship and you're not getting paid for as much as you're working, or you don't really see the future, what's going on in my life, be patient and ask God, what are you doing right now? What's going on? There is a period of wilderness where God is equipping us and molding us and shaping us for what He has in store. It doesn't take the same length of time for everybody, but God had something really special for Moses. And it took him 40 years taking care of sheep to get to the point where God is going to be able to use him for this next step. And it could even be, it's a possibility, the text doesn't say, so I'm going to be very clear with you. This is my mind just thinking about it. It could be that it wasn't even that Moses wasn't completely ready earlier. It's just that he needed to be at a stage where also others would follow his leadership. So he had to spend a few years to get to the point where others would be okay with him leading them. And finally, the time is right. And as Moses is going about doing his work faithfully, he sees something catches the corner of his eye. There's a bush, and it's on fire, but it's not being consumed. Let's read together. You can follow along with me as I read out loud. Exodus chapter 3, starting with verse 1, says, Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. I imagine it started being called that after this event. But verse 2, I don't know for sure, it could have been before. But verse 2 says, And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said what? Moses, Moses. Moses is going about life. Something catches his eye, and God speaks to him. You know, it's so amazing that the different ways that God will call our attention. Some of us are in church right now because somebody called us, somebody invited us. Maybe you're scrolling through social media and then you saw this live stream because somebody from the church shared it to their page. And you're like, well, I don't know, I'll take some time. And isn't it amazing that God will use different things to speak to us? I've talked with young adults that decided to be baptized because their grandparents said something in passing. Because their mom or their dad had called them and they had this conversation on the phone, and now they had a desire to get closer to God. You never know what God is going to use to call your attention. And Moses, he's open to this experience. He sees something a little bit out of the ordinary. He steps closer to it, and then God calls to him. And what is his answer? Here I am. There's this weird thing happening. I'm not sure what's going on, but I feel like God is calling. He says, here I am. And this gives God the opportunity to explain the plan further. We have to be willing to listen to God. When we open the Bible, are we willing to listen? When we show up at church, are we willing to allow God to take us out of our comfort zone? Because God's about to do that for Moses. But God only continues after Moses says, here I am. I'm up for it. I'm open to the possibility of change. I'm open to the possibility of a challenge. I'm open to the possibility of an adventure. Here I am, God. What do you have for me? And God now begins to interact with Moses in a way that Moses would understand, because remember, there's no Bible at this point. There's really nothing in writing before Moses, at least not that I'm aware of. And then God says to him, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off of your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Let's talk about this for a moment. One thing God sets is boundaries. Even though God is seeking him, reaching out to him, calling him, God says there is a limit for right now. You can come up to this point, and then I need you to take off your shoes. Now, it's an interesting thing. If God is clearly teaching in the Bible that to come into the presence of God, you take off your shoes, why are we wearing shoes right now? Right? I think I'm onto something. I attended church in Thailand and everybody takes off their shoes. I think they're closer to the truth than we are, maybe. So here's the thing. What if? I looked into this, and what if at the culture of the time, it was a sign of respect if you went to visit someone who had a higher status than you in society, a leader, a king, a ruler, a powerful person, you would take off your sandals before going into their tent as a sign of humility. At the time, priests, when they would go into the temple of their different gods, they would take off their sandals. What if God is speaking to Moses in a language that he understands, and he's helping him understand you're in the presence of God? I don't think the church necessarily has to have a universal dress code, because respect is shown differently in different cultures. European culture, wearing a tie is part of that. You can travel to other parts of the world, nobody wears a tie. And some of us are like, I would like to move to that place. But these are different things. These are cultural things. It's not necessarily theologically right or wrong. The idea is, do we show respect to God when we approach him? In a way that makes sense in your culture. So the tie thing was just, a terrible example. But there's sometimes we try to impose things on people, and it goes beyond theology to like our culture. I want you to dress in a certain way because I think this is how you show respect in my culture. But rather, can we teach our children? Can we be gracious with one another, but yet understanding that there is a need to show respect? It's like me telling my kids not to run in church. You're like, the Bible doesn't say anything about running in church. I'm like, first of all, you haven't read the whole Bible. Second of all, good point. It's a way of showing respect. It's sort of what I was told growing up. So whatever way, as long as we understand that there's something special about being in the presence of God, I'm not saying you have to start taking your shoes off from now on, but figure out what is it that you do in your walk with God that demonstrates to you that you believe you're in the presence of a holy and powerful being. Have something. You can create your own culture in your home when you do your family worship, when you do your personal devotions, but do something. And once again, it's not necessary. Sometimes, for example, in my personal devotion, I love to kneel down as I pray. It's a personal thing for me. It humbles me before God. It reminds me who I'm talking to. But if I'm driving my car and something crazy happens, I'm praying with my eyes open and sitting down, right? God understands. But it's good to also have that posture of respect as we approach God, to understand, because this deepens in us the faith that we have for God. I believe in a similar way as showing up to church on Sabbath morning. I teach a young adult Sabbath school. And some of the young adults are like, but early in the morning on a Saturday? And you want me to show up? Yes, because it's important. And the idea is, when you get up early on a Saturday morning when you could be sleeping in, and you choose to shower and to get ready and to show up to church and to bring this book with you, or to pick, or some of you have it on your phone, and to spend this time, why are you even doing this? Why do you bother? I guess it's important. I guess I believe in God. And I believe enough to set my alarm, to get up earlier, to get dressed, and to show up in time to spend time learning and coming together and being challenged to live life that maybe will influence others to live better lives also. There's so much suffering in this world. And I can't solve all the problems in the world, but maybe if the moment we come together for worship, we can at least encourage each other to influence at least one person to have a better life, or to bless one person this week. I think it's worth it. I think we are, making a difference, even if it's one life at a time. And that's why we come together, because we see the suffering. We want something to change. And God here is reaching out to Moses and says, Moses, the people are suffering. I watched and I saw. Let's read it together. You can follow along with me. Verse 6. God's introducing himself. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, now listen to this part, surely I have what? Seen the oppression of whom? My people who are in Egypt. I have what? Heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I have known their sorrows. This is a personal God. He sees, he hears, he knows. So I have come down to deliver them. What is God doing? Coming down to do what? To deliver them. God saw, he heard, he knows. Now he's doing something about it. He's coming down, he's going to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and all the other ites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come up to me. I also have seen the oppression in which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will do what? Send you. Like, whoa. God, you just said that you were coming down and you were going to deliver them. Why are you sending me? And that's the call to adventure. God comes into your heart and he says, I have plans for you. It's going to be great. There's a lot of suffering. I don't want the suffering to continue. I want you to be a part. I'm going to be the solution, but you're going to be a part of it. God wants you to be a part of what he's doing to relieve the suffering of others. God is the one doing the relieving, but he wants to do it through you. And he's calling you to that adventure. Are you willing to do it? I would, Lord, but I'm busy. As soon as I finish my studies, then we'll talk. I would, Lord, but my kids are really young and you know how busy and hard it is. But Lord, as soon as they're older, then Lord, I would, but right now I'm looking for a spouse. And as soon as I'm married, then I'll do something for you. Lord, I would, but I'm new at my job and it's so much work. And as soon as I get promoted, then I'll do something for you. Then God say, hey, I want you to relieve the suffering of my children. I am going to do it. I heard it. I saw it. I know what's going on. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to send you to them. Are you willing to join God in what He's doing to save others? If He says, I'm coming, I'm going to do it, I'm going to send you. And this is when Moses replies, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? God says, I am sending you to Pharaoh that you may go and bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses says, who am I? Lord, I would love to do this, but who am I to do this? I can't. And I love God's answer. God explains exactly why Moses is able to do this. He explains exactly why you are able to do this. God says, verse 12, He says, I will certainly be. Okay, let's try that one more time. I will certainly be with you. And this shall be a sign that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. I'm going to be with you. And spoiler alert, you're going to be successful. So let's review this. God is calling you the same way that He called Moses. And let me explain this. Like, Pastor, I don't get it. This is a story about Moses, not about me. I believe that this is a story about Moses, that he was a historical figure. I believe this really, literally happened. But I also believe that this story is in the Bible because there's a principle at work of how God works through us to help others, because you see these principles repeated. We just saw these principles with the story of Abraham. We're seeing similar principles again, and I believe God calls each and every one of us, if we are willing, to a similar idea. This idea that I'm going to be with you. I am sending you to do my will, to bring blessings, to relieve the suffering. And don't worry, all I need you to do is show up. This past week, I had lunch with one of the members here in our church, and we were talking. I love talking with people and hearing what God is doing in their life. And this member was sharing with me all the cool things that God has done. He said, Pastor, all I had to do was show up. And I get scared, and it was hard. But when I showed up, God would continue to open doors, and people around me were amazed, and I was amazed. I was like, I knew God was going to do that. But all I had to do was show up. It's exciting. But we have to take that step. First, we have to say, here I am. And then God explains the plan. And then we have to not back down. And to say, I'll show up and see what you do. And Moses is struggling. Who am I? God says, I'm going to be with you. But then it's really interesting, because there's these obstacles, right? There's these questions that Moses asks. Lord, there's some problems, there's some challenges here. One of them is when I tell them, hey, God sent me. And they say, okay, God who? What's His name? And if you've grown up studying the Bible, if you've been reading the Bible, you probably have a similar problem. I mean, we're used to just people believing either there's one God or no God. But what do you do when people have all kinds of gods? And they say, well, which one? Like, well, God, the God. Because this is hard, right? Moses asked him, who do I say? And God doesn't give him a name like Bob, tell him that Bob sent you. It doesn't work that way. God says who? I am who I am. I am sent you. God, I can't say that. That sounds weird. And let me tell you, there's whole sermons on this. And this idea, you can study for the rest of your life. I'm still studying it, and I still don't understand the whole thing. But I'll give you something really quick and short, just so we can keep going. But this is something worth studying. I believe that God's I am is the perfect answer to Moses's who am I. You see, who I am doesn't really matter because it's all about I am who is sending me. As long as God is, it doesn't matter for who I am, it's who He is. So I am is sending Him. And there's a lot more into this. I just don't want to chase that rabbit right now. But God says, I am who I am. So He answers that question. And then Moses, struggles more. And you go to chapter 4, verse 1. It says, then Moses answered and said, but suppose they don't believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose to say, the Lord has not appeared to you. And I love this next part. In verse 2, so Exodus chapter 4, verse 2, God says to Moses, what? What do you have in your hand? Now think about this because this is going to tie in with the weekly challenge for this week. When Moses is struggling, and Lord, what's going to happen? What if people don't believe me? God says, what do you have in your hand? I have a stick. That works. We'll use that. Whatever you have in your hand, whatever God has given you at this stage in your life, He can use that. Because an interesting thing I skipped over, but this whole long explanation that God gives after I am who I am, God explains that He's the God of their forefathers. God explains what He's going to do for them. And it's amazing because God's identity is not found in a specific name. And I have met people who insist in praying the specific name. You have to say it this way, and you can't call God this because you have to use, the Hebrew. But God doesn't seem interested in that. When you ask Him what's His name, He says, first of all, I am, and then I'm the God of your fathers. I'm the God that's done. So God is a relational God. He explains the relationship He had before us, the relationship He has with us, and what He's going to do for us. So who God is when I stop and look at my life and I see what God has done for me. And let me ask you real quick, anybody here ever had an occasion in your life where you think, looking back on it, says, I should not have walked away from that? Anybody ever almost die? Okay, there's a few that are honest here. Right? You're like, I shouldn't be around right now. Like, I did something really dumb. Or this thing completely out of my control happened, but I'm still alive. God working in your life, right? And then you look forward and you say, I wonder what God has in store. And when you look at the Bible, God tells you what He has in store. And then based on that, we know who God is. It's not just a specific name like Bob, but it's rather who He is, His character, how He interacts with us, His plan for our lives, and what He has done and who He continues to be. So looking back and looking forward, I understand who God is right now. Make sense? I look at the cross, I look at the second coming, and I understand who God is right now. And also what He's calling me to do. What do you have in your hand? He says, I have a stick, and that'll work. I'll use that, whatever you have, to bless others, to convince others that I'm real enough to be followed and to be trusted. But that goes with your personal walk with God and with you sharing what God has done for you. Last week, I gave out the challenge for us to write down what we believe God is calling us to do. And for us to write down the first step we're going to take to walk in that direction. And maybe some of you, as you're trying to take that first step, you're like Moses. You're struggling a little bit, right? Later on, Moses says, I can't, I'm not eloquent of speech. Maybe he had a stutter or a speech impediment. I don't know. But God answers in verse 11 of Exodus chapter 4. The Lord said, who has made men's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, verse 12, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. God says, go. Bring your stick with you. I'll use the stick. Oh, I can't talk. I'll teach you what to say. I just need you to show up. I just need you to go. So maybe you struggle with that first step. I'm busy. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I don't know how this is going to work. Just take the first step. Watch me use you. So the challenge that I have for you this week is, what do you have in your hand? Maybe you're coming to God and say, oh, people won't believe me, or this is going to be hard, or I don't know, I'm new in the faith, or I just showed up, or I just moved here, or whatever it is. I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too whatever. What do you have in your hand? This week I received an email of someone who is transferring to our church, wants to be a member, but does not live here. Pastor, is there anything I can do online from home remotely to contribute to the church? So we're looking into ways to do that. And I love that because it's the idea that I want to be involved. Is there something I can do? We just heard a story about making quilts for children who are struggling with cancer. What can you do? What's in your hand? Right now, at this stage in your life, not what you will have when you finish the next step or whatever. Right now, what do you have? Maybe you have experience, but you lack the energy. Maybe you have energy, but you lack the experience. And it's beautiful because as we come together, it works beautifully. That's why we're a church family. It takes all of us coming together. Write it down and pray about it this week. Lord, as I pray this, I think this is what I have. I don't know what you can do with this. In Moses' case, it's just a stick. God says, I'll work with that. What is it that you have right now? And how can you use it to help relieve the suffering of one person? To help guide one person to take one step towards Jesus? To help someone in a significant way? Just be intentional. Just make an effort, because let me tell you, you will learn along the way. The adventure, it's not going to be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be worthwhile. It's supposed to be meaningful. We have opportunities here in our church. We have the thrift store. We have a food bank. We have children ministries. We have the backpack ministries. We have pet ministries, men's ministry. We have a lot going on. Cars ministries, like we talked about last week. I had another person come up to me and say that they also received a blessing from the cars ministries in our church. There is something, and guess what? We have room for more. If you have something in your heart and it says, well, we don't have a quilting ministry yet. Well, maybe we'll start one. What do you have in your hand? Are you willing to offer it to God? When God calls you, are you willing to say, here I am? Because who we are is not the big part. It's all about who God is. And then He's asking you, what do you have in your hand? I'll use it. I'll use it to bless somebody else. And if you're willing to be used by God and to take that step, at least to start praying about it this week and to give it a try, I invite you to stand as we close with prayer. Father in heaven, some of us here may be able to relate to Moses' story in several different levels. He was supposed to have died as a baby. Maybe some of us have gone through a point in our lives where we should have died, but you kept us alive. Lord, Moses had experiences being in the palace and being out in the wilderness, and Lord, turns out that those were the two things that would come in handy in dealing with the Pharaoh and in leading the people through the wilderness. But Lord, in the end, all that he really needed was your presence with him. And you could use even the stick he had in his hand as a witness for you. Lord, here we are standing this morning with our heads bowed before you. Lord, some of us may know exactly what you called us to do. Some of us maybe are still figuring it out. I pray that you'd bring to our minds, what is it that we have at this point in our lives right now that we could put to use to be a blessing, to lead someone to you, to help relieve suffering? What would you have us do? Guide us in this week. Give us the courage, Lord, to say yes to this adventure that you're calling us to. And thank you, because you promised to be with us as we go on this adventure. You will not leave us or forsake us. So thank you for being our God. Thank you for your willingness to use us. And give us, Lord, the courage to step out in faith and to receive a blessing for you and to be a blessing for others. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
I hope you are blessed by today's message. If you have any questions or would like someone to pray with you or for you, please feel free to contact us. May God bless you. and keep you till we meet again.